Hey everybody, I'm really glad you found Suncrest Messages. I do hope you'll take a minute to subscribe to either our podcast or our YouTube channel. And you can also download the Suncrest app. There's great stuff there that goes far beyond these messages. Either way, I hope that the next 30 minutes helps you integrate faith with your life. Enjoy.
Hey Suncrest, my name is Brad and this is my story. In 2012, we were just coming out of the Great Recession, and my business being connected to the housing industry, it was a really tough 3 years, and a lot of people were suffering during that time, and we were certainly suffering as well. And I'm certain that's what led Jody and I to Suncrest. We'd only been attending Suncrest for about 6 months, but got the opportunity to have breakfast with Greg one day. Toward the end of breakfast, Greg said, "Brad, can I ask you, have you ever been on a retreat before?" And I responded that no, I hadn't. And he said, "Well, would you like to go to Liberia with us?" Needless to say, that the request really caught me off guard, and I certainly didn't know what to say except for, "Hey, let me get back to you on that, Greg." And but it stuck with me the whole day, of course, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And when I got home and told Jody about it, she said, "What? And where is this place?" And let's just say that it wasn't welcomed with open arms by any means. After discussing it at length with Jody, she knew that I knew that I needed to go on this trip. And so I called Greg and I said, "I'm in." And it seemed like just a few days after that, we were on our way to Liberia, but of course it was much longer. Going to Liberia, I wasn't really sure what my purpose on the trip was going to be. We weren't going to build anything. I wasn't going to heal anybody by any means or diagnose anybody. But kind of halfway through the trip, I realized we were there as beacons of hope. We were there to show them that we did care about them, and we did want to do what we could to let them know that Christ was there for them and for all of us. And it's that hope that when you see it in action, you see it really have an effect, that you know it's more than just a word. So hope is a real thing. And I would encourage you, if you get the opportunity during these uncertain times, to say a word of encouragement, to tell people that you have faith and you believe that everything is going to be fine because God is with us and God's promises are true. And I think you'd be really surprised by what a tremendous effect you can have on somebody's day. If you have the opportunity, make sure that you remember maybe my story and reach out. See if you can bring some hope to somebody.
Hey Suncrest, it's great to be with you today. I imagine you loved Brad's story like I do. I see this happen all the time with people. They get out there and they serve people, and it jostles something in us that's very healthy. And I've seen it this week, obviously working through all of you. Suncrest has tried to step up our response for the region in this time. And, Habitat for Humanity has just given Suncrest a lot of love on their Facebook page for a group that went there last Saturday. Interestingly, their volunteer coordinator's name is Leslie Corona. And we had a good laugh about that when we were together last week. It's sometimes hard to know what's okay to laugh at in such a serious time, but it's really healthy to laugh. I had somebody say to me, I didn't realize I was giving up so much for Lent, and it just kind of made me smile and laugh out loud. So I want to give you permission to laugh in the midst of a really tough time. The food bank in Northwest Indiana, in a very short turnaround, you flooded them with volunteers last Saturday, and it was just amazing to me and to them. They said on their Facebook page, a big shout out to Suncrest Christian Church for showing up in record numbers. And of course, it's not just that. You're showing up for blood drives, you're doing the drop off, we're executing on this delivery of medications. So thank you for participating every place that you can. And last weekend, when we moved online very quickly for this weekend service, you turned up in record numbers. It was amazing to see how many people were participating, how many people were sharing it with their friends. I hope that you keep that up because it's just been a really powerful experience. And then my inbox gets flooded, especially last week after we finished Getting Past Your Past, with just stories of how God's at work, even through this medium of video. So people were sending me actually videos of them burning their Getting Past Your Past card and talking to me about the emotion attached to that. So I'm just really grateful for all of your engagement. You are carrying yourselves in really healthy ways. And this week, I've been in touch with people in our church who work in restaurants and own restaurants. And of course, it's not just restaurants. I've talked to people in healthcare, talked to people in education, and it's a very tumultuous time. A good friend of mine who's in my men's group works on investments with people, and all of you know what's happening in the stock market. And I just have a lot of respect for people who are from Suncrest, and they're carrying themselves in the way of Jesus, like with a confidence and with a calm, and spreading that around them. And a lot of times I see people carrying burdens for other people, and I think, let's just keep doing that. Let's be the church. Let's be for our region. And here's the truth. Some of you might be in a position where you need somebody to carry your burden right now. It's just a little too overwhelming. And to you, I say there's no shame in that. Just reach out for help. Give us a call at the church, or reach out to someone in your group or from your serving team. We are here for each other right now. This week, I came across a scripture that someone shared with me that was really meaningful to me in this time. So before I get into the message, I actually want to just ask you to pause a little bit. Listen to me read these 3 verses from Psalm 91. And, just imagine that they're words from God himself for you, because this is the words of God. Those who live in the shelter of the Most High will find their rest in the shadow of the Almighty. Do not dread the disease that stalks in the darkness, nor the disaster that strikes at midday. This I declare about the Lord. He alone is my refuge, my place of safety. He is my God, and I trust him. And that's really my prayer for you through this Suncrest, that we trust him. Among all the conversation about quarantine or sheltering in place, it's really healthy to know that God is our fortress. He's our refuge. So hold on to that this week. I was supposed to kick off a totally different series this week. We had planned one called You in 5 Years. And when I sat down on Monday to think, what am I going to talk about this week? One thing I knew, nobody's thinking about 5 years from now, right now. So we will come back to that series at a later date. I can't wait to share it with you. But I'm imagining that all of us right now are thinking about right now. And what really strikes me is that we should lean into some of the fascinating stories that are in the scriptures that oftentimes are marked by difficult or tenuous or bewildering circumstances. And we see how God is at work, and we see how the people of God respond in those situations. And so for the coming weeks, we're going to look at some of those stories. And I actually have the idea that there will be one memorable verse out of each one of these stories that I'm going to ask you to actually memorize, to take with you and carry with you all week long. We're calling the series Made for This, and the whole idea is that when a world is in a little bit of crisis or chaos, it is the people who have faith in God, who follow Jesus, who are actually prepared to lean into this moment. I think we're made for this. So I'm going to tell you the story of Esther this week, and I'm actually going to go ahead and give you the verse to remember, and I'll come back to it later in the story. But I just want you to say this with me. Let me read it first, and then I'm going to ask you to repeat it with me. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. I know you're probably sitting in your living room, sitting at your computer, maybe on your TV right now, but say this out loud with me. And who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. I don't know if you've ever read the book of Esther in the Old Testament. It is a fascinating book of the Bible because it's one of the two books of the Bible that actually don't even mention the word God. But even though that word isn't printed in this book, his work is all over the place. And I think we need a message like that right now. So let me set the scene of this story for you. It's absolutely fascinating. This is Esther chapter 1, verse 1. It says, this is what happened during the time of Xerxes, the Xerxes who ruled over 127 provinces stretching from India to Cush. Now, let me just set that context. Xerxes was the king of Persia, and Persia was large and in charge. They stretched all the way from India to Cush, which is the region of the Nile River. It would be modern-day Egypt for us. And there were 127 provinces that this king oversaw, and oh my goodness, you can't imagine how good life was for him from a worldly perspective. But here's one of the interesting things to me. He had kind of settled into the enjoyment of this world. He had come to a place where he could relax a little bit. He could enjoy the comforts. And when you think about what a king or a leader should be, you can probably put people into three categories. They would be maybe a harmful king or harmful leader, a harmless king or harmless leader, or a helpful king and a helpful leader. And there's plenty of stories of harmful leaders. A lot of times I find people content just to be harmless and not willing to step into being helpful. So Xerxes was enjoying this. And actually one of the things it says in this story, follow this with me. It says, for a full 180 days, he displayed the vast wealth of his kingdom and the splendor and glory of his majesty. Here's what's happening. He's throwing a party that lasts for 6 months. There's so much wealth, so much comfort. He's in charge. One of the reasons he's in charge is that he's conquered all kinds of surrounding nations, including the nation of Israel. So the Jewish people, the Hebrew people, had been conquered and now were under the rule of someone who was not one of their leaders. You should read the story in full for yourself this week, but here's what happens. He has a queen who he gets mad at, and he's the king. He can do whatever he wants, and so he kind of brushes her off to the side, and he decides that he's going to have kind of a beauty pageant, a contest to see who will be the next queen. Let me read this passage to you. It says, the king's personal attendants proposed, let a search be made in every province of his realm to bring all these beautiful young women and let beauty treatments be given to them. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen. This advice appealed to the king and he followed it. Now, you got to remember, this is such a day that's so different than today's world, right? I mean, this is long before Christ even came. It's a very primitive world. It's an underdeveloped world. It's all those things. I mean, think about this. In what kind of world would you have a place where someone is a bachelor and they gather as many young and beautiful women as they can, and then they put together kind of a contest for those young, beautiful women to charm him and try to win his love, and they kind of hang out with each other, and they get to know each other, and they make alliances and have likes and dislikes, and then eventually he chooses one of them. What kind of primitive, crazy, moronic world would have that kind of contest? The Bachelor? So just think about this a little bit. This is not the way God wanted things to happen. And yet in the midst of this, one of the women who had come from one of the provinces was a very unique person. This is where we're introduced in the story to a man named Mordecai and a cousin of his named Hadassah. It says Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah. Now, Hadassah's name is also Esther, so I just don't want you to be confused by that. It says, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. Just pause with that for a second. Hadassah was an orphan. She needed someone in her family to step up in her time of need, and Mordecai did so. And he raised her, and she became a wonderful woman. It says, this young woman was beautiful, and Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother had died. Well, as it turns out, Esther is the one who's entered into this contest, and she wins. She becomes the queen for all of Persia. She is Xerxes' wife. She is Jewish, but she doesn't tell anybody that she's Jewish. So she's in this situation where the king of a foreign country has brought her into this court. Now, a couple of other things start to shift in the storyline. Xerxes has kind of his best friend, his right-hand man. It's a guy named Haman. And Haman really had it in for the Jewish people, the people of God. And so he kind of coaxed Xerxes into signing a decree that would eventually wipe out all of the Jewish people. And then this is, after the king put this into place, it says, the couriers went out, spurred on by the king's command, and the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. Now, Susa was the capital city. The king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Susa was bewildered. Now, I just want you to feel this for a little bit with me. Xerxes, Haman, life is good for them, but word has gone out and started to spread all around them that unsettles a lot of people, right? This was actually a group of people that was going to lose their life. The attempt was to wipe them off the face of the earth. But the chaos and the confusion and all those things, I think, man, that just set a tension. It set a difficulty. It set a fear into people. And it's kind of fascinating if you think about what happens next. Now, obviously, this isn't disconnected. This is why I chose this story. When I talk to people during our crisis, I sense this same bewilderness and confusion and chaos. And I think when you're in that kind of setting, it's amazing how quickly we adjust to new normals. Just last Sunday afternoon, I just had the television on, and the governor of Illinois came on, and he said, hey, we're going to close all the restaurants in Illinois. And I thought, I can't believe they're going to do that. And by Sunday evening, I had already adjusted to it. And then on Monday, it happened in Indiana. And I think in times of chaos, we get kind of unsettled, and we start to adjust to certain things. But in this case, the people of God were going to be wiped off the face of the earth. And so Mordecai, who had raised Esther in his own home, tries to get word to her of what's going to happen and asks her to go to the king to appeal to him on behalf of the Jews. Now, it's very interesting. Esther's first response to Mordecai was, I can't do that. She thought it was too scary. If she went into the king's presence, he could have her killed. He could shut her out. She thought it's probably not going to work. It won't be effective. The chances really aren't very high. She said, even to Mordecai, she said, listen, the king hasn't even called me in for 30 days. I'm not sure he's that interested in me anymore. She had all kinds of reasons for why she couldn't step into the crisis. But Mordecai didn't let up. He actually came back to her and gave her a very strong message. I want you to hear what he said. He said, for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. He's saying, listen, God is in control. God is ultimately in control. And if you don't step up, God will use someone else. That's who God is. He said, but you and your father's family will perish. And then he comes to this line in the story that's so powerful to me. He says, and who knows, but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Now, I want us all to live with that phrase just for a little bit here. Who knows, but that you've come to your royal position for such a time as this. Whenever there's a crisis, whenever there's some bewilderment, whenever there's some chaos, it's easy to put our heads down, to look and say, oh, how am I going to handle today? I'm afraid about tomorrow. We watch the news. Everything floods into our mind. But one of the things that Mordecai is saying to Esther here, and I think saying to us, is, no, you'll have to lift up your eyes a little bit. He says, and who knows? He says, maybe you should just look up. How do you know that when your parents died and you ended up in my house and you were beautiful and you ended up in the king's contest, that we were going to end up in the place we're in right now? Nobody could have predicted this. Nobody could have even prepared or planned for this. But who knows? Maybe God has a plan, and he's actually been working behind the scenes. He's actually been at work in you and in me and preparing us for this time. Who knows? And he says that you have come to your royal position. So, none of us are in a royal position. You're not a queen and I'm not a king. But if we just step back from that a little bit, I think what he's saying is, who knows but that God hasn't poured out goodness to you. In this case, the goodness to her was that she was literally a queen in the king's court. But what it meant was that she had influence. She had strength, she had energy, she had resources, she had time, she had money. And I think for us today, this is really worth us asking about ourselves. But who knows that God hasn't placed us in the wealthiest country on planet Earth, most of us in fairly secure circumstances overall. Who knows that God hasn't given us who are younger the health and the strength that we need? Who knows that God hasn't given you experiences that either prepare you to serve someone in a technical way, or maybe you've experienced some pain that prepares you to lean into somebody else's pain? Who knows that you haven't been given something good for such a time as this? And it's just an acknowledgement that circumstances collide in our world many times that create unique times. And we're in one right now. And I want you, if you're someone who trusts in God, if you're someone who thinks, yeah, God has been at work in my life, to think that such a time as this is the very time that God has been preparing you and me for. So let me just read the whole verse, the whole sentence one more time. And who knows but that you've come to your position for such a time as this. Times like this cause us to step back a little bit. It reminds me that sometimes I get focused on my comfort. Sometimes I get focused on my career. Sometimes I get focused on conquering whatever the next thing is, the next big accomplishment. And there's nothing wrong with careers, and there's nothing wrong with comfort, and there's nothing wrong with taking the next hill. But none of those are as important as our calling. Our calling is something divine. And I think this could be the greatest moment for the people of God. That he's placed something in you to aim higher than comfort, to aim beyond your career, to not just think about conquering the next thing, but to embrace a calling that says, I will look into the broken parts of this world. I will look into where the pain is, where the suffering is, where the heartache is, and I will not sit by. Who knows? But that you've been gifted, resourced, positioned for such a time as this. And I'm trying to lead you, Suncrest. I'm trying to lead a whole people of God to say, at this time, we are for the region because we've been made for this. So I just have two questions for you, two simple questions. First, who plays Mordecai in your life? I mean, honestly, I kind of hope that I'm playing Mordecai in your life. I hope that I'm someone who can look into your life and say, hey, listen, there's lots of things that are important. I understand not everything we do might work. There's a chance that it would fail. It might even be a little bit dangerous at certain times, but I think it's the right thing to do. And this is what the people of God do in a crisis. But I hope I'm not the only one Who is it that you trust enough to listen to? Who is it that you give permission to speak into you and challenge you? And if nobody's coming to mind right now, I think you should pray to God for someone like that in your life. Because like Esther needed Mordecai to remind her that she herself was the recipient at her time of need, is now calling her to be a participant to help someone else's need. We need that. But here's the second question. What goodness has God given you for such a time as this? What goodness has God given you for such a time as this? And beginning right here and right now, how will you imagine that you've actually been made for this? God's given you a set of skills. God's given you maybe more time than you thought you would have had just a week or two ago. God's not given you a spirit of timidity or fear, but a spirit of power and love. And this is our time. Suncrest, there are needs all around you, and you don't have to do all these things through what Suncrest is doing. Walk across the street to your neighbor. Call up your grandmother. Be the church wherever you are for such a time as this. Barbara Williams Skinner was a follower of Jesus, and she's actually had kind of a towering presence in the fight against racism. And she has a phrase she uses. She suggests these are probably God's words to people. I find this powerful. She says, this is, I think, what God would say. He'd say, it's not your fault, but it is your time. It's not your fault, but it is your time. You know, a lot of times we think, well, it's my responsibility to step into something if I caused the challenge. But the truth is, the people of God all through the scriptures, and especially in Jesus himself, it wasn't things they caused where they were willing to step in and be part of the solution. It's a possibility that you and I should look around and say, you know what, it's not my fault. It's not my fault that people are suffering over here or there's a need over there. It's not my fault that people are locked up in a nursing home and can't have any visitors right now. It's not my fault that the hospitals are being overwhelmed. Those things aren't my fault. It's not my fault that there's a blood shortage or that people need blood. Those things aren't my fault. But it is our time. And I believe, my friends, that God has given you the strength and the power. He's collectively given us the mission to be used by him to change lives for such a time as this. And so I can't wait to see how God uses you and me together. We'll have to lean into one another. We'll have to lift our eyes off the news and out of our Facebook pages to say, God, what are you doing here? When you hear of a need, you lean in and you meet the need. Because I pray that it's us, the followers of Jesus, who are here. I want to read a scripture and then offer a prayer to close this message here. These are actually the words of Jesus, and I don't know if he was channeling the story of Esther when he said these things, but it seems as though he definitely has this picture that God has arranged the world, that there's needs and heartache and brokenness and crisis and sickness, and then he has dropped you and I into particular places at particular times, into neighborhoods and communities. And this was Jesus' message to us. He said, you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Let me pray for that right now. God, I pray that you give us the strength, you give us the opportunities, you help us to see how you've prepared us, and you use us. We're available to let our light shine before men. so they see our good deeds and glorify you. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, I really hope that was helpful for integrating faith with life. Listen, if you're in Northwest Indiana, I'd love to have you join us in person. Head over to suncrest.org and plan your visit.